I'd known Joe for a good 10 years and had spent countless hours at his bar, the Landing Strip Lounge, drinking PBR and eyeing the attractive girls who worked for him. They came and went, but they all had one thing in common. They were stunning. The current staff was no exception. Karen behind the bar and the waitresses, Tina and Cookie, made me want to tear off their clothes and have my way with them. Well, that statement wasn't entirely accurate. While it held true for Karen and Tina, it wasn't the same for Cookie. When I looked at her, my thoughts were more along the lines of, why couldn't I have someone like her for a wife instead of the woman I'm married to? It wasn't that she wasn't as sexy as the other two. She was, and more so. But while Karen and Tina exuded a sexy confidence that screamed, I'm hot and I know it, and if you get lucky, I might just scratch your eyes out, Cookie had a different allure. With her, it was more like, if I were yours, I'd love you fiercely and be the best wife you could ever hope for. In other words, Karen and Tina would be casual flings or friends with benefits, whereas Cookie was someone you could see a future with. But no matter how much I wanted any of the three, it wasn't going to happen. It wouldn't happen because of the way I was wired. I was one of those guys who actually meant it when they said, I do, and, for better or worse, until death do us part. And right then, it was as bad as it could get. I had recently discovered that my wife was spending intimate time in bed with her boss. To make matters worse, it seemed some of our mutual friends knew about it, though I began to question if they were truly my friends. A real friend would have warned me if they knew my wife was betraying me. Clearly, they were more Claudia's friends than mine. They were definitely off my list of friends and off my Christmas card list. I sat there nursing my beer and brooding over my unfaithful wife when Bobby Denton slid onto the bar stool next to me. How you doing, Wally? Hanging in there, Bobby. You? Same old, same old. You gonna be here tomorrow night? Why? What's tomorrow? Open mic night. We've got some decent talent lined up. Yeah, but I'd have to endure all your lame blonde jokes. I see your wife's face when you tell them, and I wonder why she hasn't cut your tongue out yet while you're sleeping. I don't sleep around her. I thought that was an odd thing to say, but before I could comment, he added, got to go talk with Joe about tomorrow, and walked away. Karen came over and asked if I was ready for another PBR, and I told her no. I finished the one in front of me, then got up and headed home. Claudia had dinner ready when I got home, greeting me with a hug and a kiss, which I returned. She was unaware that I knew about her secret affair with her boss, and I intended to keep it that way until I had everything in order. I still wanted to maintain our sex life, so I had to keep my knowledge to myself for now. When I first discovered Claudia's infidelity, I consulted an attorney who laid out the harsh realities of divorcing in a no-fault state. In short, I'd be screwed, and Claudia would walk away smiling. According to the attorney, my other options were to either disappear without divorcing her, or to smile, suck it up, and live with it. Suck it up and live with it. Easy advice when it's not happening to you. But in the end, that's exactly what I decided to do. Live with it until I could get myself into a financial position to leave Claudia on my terms. My terms being that I didn't give her anything and left Thomas Billings broken and bleeding. Taking down her boss would be the easy part. All I had to do was inform his wife about his infidelity, and if I had read her correctly, she'd cut him off at the knees and kick him to the curb. Sarah Billings was the only child of Barton Benton, who doted on her, but was no fool. When his darling daughter announced her intention to marry Thomas Billings, whom she had met at a company Christmas party, Benton insisted on a prenuptial agreement. This agreement ensured that Billings would never assume control of Benton Industries if anything happened to Benton. Sarah was his sole heir, and he wanted to make sure she retained control of the Benton fortune. How did I know all this? Claudia worked at Benton Industries as Billings's secretary and was deeply entrenched in the gossip network. She would bring home all the latest news, and it often became dinner table conversation. When Benton and his wife died in a plane crash, their only heir, Sarah, found herself with a company to run. Unsure whether she could handle it or simply unwilling to, Thomas Billings, the manager of purchasing, was suddenly promoted to president of Benton Industries. Sarah might not have wanted to run the company, but she was no fool. She kept the titles of CEO and chairman of the board to maintain oversight. All I had to do to deal with Billings was inform his wife about his infidelity. Claudia followed Billings into the executive offices, but not as his secretary. She was promoted to personal assistant to the president. This promotion brought mixed feelings. I was pleased with the extra income, especially since we had just purchased a new house and furnished it with new furniture and appliances. However, the new job required Claudia to travel frequently with Billings as he flew around the country negotiating contracts. She was gone for 2 or 3 days at a time, 2 or 3 times a month. I wanted my wife with me, not jet-setting around the country, but she was happy with her new job, so I kept quiet and lived with it. Until the night Claudia and I went to the Elks Club dance. We had a great time drinking, dancing, and socializing with our friends. About 2 hours into the party, I had to go to the bathroom. I was sitting in one of the stalls taking care of business when Brett and Chuck walked in. I recognized their voices immediately. I could hear the sound of them peeing as Chuck said, "Claudia is sure looking hot tonight." "I know, and I sure would like a piece of her," Brett replied. "I don't know if she would be able to fit you in." I was thinking maybe I could get her by threatening to tell Wally what she does on her trips with her boss. I wouldn't if I were you. Wally is so hung up on that easy girl that he wouldn't believe you. He might even kick your ass for bad-mouthing her. Chuck was right. I didn't believe it. I knew my Claudia. She loved me as much as I loved her. My Claudia would never, and I do mean never, cheat on me. When I left that stall, I had half a mind to confront those 2 assholes and punch them out for what they said about my wife. The other half was saying, "Don't be stupid. All you will do is cause a scene and end up embarrassing Claudia." I let reason prevail, went back to the party, and tried to enjoy myself. When the party was over, we went home. As we cuddled afterward, I knew there was no way my wife was cheating on me. Funny thing about us humans, we have this thing called human nature, and one of the things it drives us to do is prove things to ourselves. Someone says, "You can't do that, so you have to prove that you can." Someone else says, "That just isn't possible, so you have to prove that it is." Someone says, "Your wife is cheating on you," and you have to prove that she isn't. The easiest way to prove it? Show up where she is on one of her trips and see for yourself that it's a stone-cold lie. So that's what I did. Billings and Claudia went to Houston, and as always, Claudia called me to let me know where they were staying. I caught the next flight to Houston. At the front desk, I asked if my wife had checked in yet, and, after showing my ID, they confirmed she was in room 306. I then asked if her cousin had checked in, pretending she was meeting him there. Yes, indeed, Cousin Thomas was in room 901. I was heading to the house phone to call Claudia's room when I glanced at the elevators. There they were, Claudia and Billings, coming out holding hands and smiling at each other. They stopped, kissed as the elevator doors closed behind them, and headed for the hotel bar. I'd seen enough to confirm what I'd overheard, and I could have turned around, gone home, and figured out my next steps. But human nature told me, "You need to know more, Wally." I couldn't follow them directly into the bar. They'd spot me immediately. I needed to alter my appearance enough to go unnoticed. I ducked into the hotel's gift shop, which had a lot of Houston Astros gear. I bought a ball cap, windbreaker, and canvas bag with the team's logo, along with a pair of cheap sunglasses. I also picked up a copy of People magazine and then headed to the public restroom. I put my suit coat and tie into the bag, punched the lenses out of my horn-rimmed glasses, and donned the cap and windbreaker. With my new look, I headed to the bar. It wasn't much of a disguise, and it wouldn't stand up to close scrutiny, but I didn't expect Claudia or Billings to be paying close attention to anyone around them. They certainly wouldn't expect to see me in Houston, and judging by their public displays of affection, they clearly hadn't considered the possibility of being watched by private detectives or investigators. I spotted them as soon as I entered the bar. They were sitting in a booth, drinks in front of them, kissing. I took a table where I could see them, ordered a drink, and pretended to read my magazine while sipping. They had 2 drinks, played kissy face for a bit, and after about half an hour, they got up and left the bar. They walked right by me without even a glance. I waited a minute, then got up and followed them. I watched as they walked hand in hand to the elevator, pressed the call button, and kissed until the door opened. They got on, the door closed, and the elevator headed up. It didn't stop at the 3rd floor for Claudia to go to her room. It went all the way to the 9th floor, stopped for a minute, and then headed down again. It didn't stop at 3 on the way down either. I'd seen enough and headed home. I saw an attorney, got the bad news, and started the process of ending my relationship with Claudia. When I got off work on Wednesday, I didn't bother going home. I received a call from Claudia telling me that Billings had a meeting in Detroit first thing in the morning, so they would be flying there from Houston, but she would be home the next day. I stopped at the landing strip to have a beer or 3 and see if Bobby was right about the decent talent lined up for the night. I took a bar stool, ordered my usual PBR, and settled in. As usual, Bobby started out the evening with a blonde joke. 2 blondes were riding up in an elevator. Long before reaching their floor, the elevator stopped and a really great-looking guy got on. He smiled at the blondes and reached over to hit the button for the next floor. Then he stood and admired the scenery as the elevator went up. When the door opened behind him, he smiled at the blondes, turned, and went out the door. When he turned to leave, the blondes saw a large number of dandruff flakes down his back. The first blonde turned to the second and said, "Ooh." The second blonde replied, "That's okay. If I can get him home, I'll give him head and shoulders." The first blonde looked puzzled and asked, "How do you give shoulders?" Bobby got a decent laugh from everyone except his wife, who just sat at her table in the back, throwing dirty looks at him. He went ahead and introduced the next wannabe stand-up comedian. The guy took the stage, looked out at the crowd, and said, "2 boys were arguing when the teacher entered the room. The teacher asked why they were arguing, and the first boy said, 'We found a $10 bill and decided to give it to whoever can tell the biggest lie.' 'You should be ashamed of yourselves,' the teacher said. 'When I was your age, I didn't even know what a lie was.' The 2 boys looked at each other, nodded, and then gave the $10 to the teacher. He got a polite laugh and continued. A man goes to the doctor and says, 'Doctor, wherever I touch, it hurts.' The doctor asked him to elaborate, and the man said, 'When I touch my shoulder, it hurts. When I touch my knee, it hurts. When I touch my forehead, it really hurts.' The doctor shook his head knowingly and said, 'I know exactly what the problem is. You've broken your finger.' He wasn't all that funny, so I was sipping my beer and scanning the crowd. No reason, just people watching, when Cookie took the seat next to me. 'Hi, handsome. Buy a poor working girl a drink?' I caught Karen's attention, pointed at Cookie, and Karen nodded. A minute later, she put a screwdriver down in front of Cookie. 'And to what does Wally owe for the pleasure of your company?' 'Nothing, just curious.' 'Curious? Curious about what?' 'About you.' 'Me? You can't be serious.' 'Why not? You're good-looking and a nice guy.' 'Nice. Me?' 'Yes, you. You come in here often, and I can tell from the way you look at Karen, Tina, and me that you like what you see. But unlike many others who come in here, you keep your hands to yourself and don't make lewd or suggestive comments. The question is, why haven't you made a pass at one of us?' 'You know why, Cookie? I'm married.' 'Why?' 'Why what?' 'Why are you married to that tramp? Surely you have to know she's cheating on you.' That caught me totally by surprise, and Cookie noticed the look that came over my face. 'You didn't know? How could you not? Everyone else knows.' 'How do you know?' She pointed and said, 'See that guy sitting over there in the corner booth with the redhead? That's my brother Rick. He works at Benton. Everyone there knows about your wife and Billings. Rick came in here one day, saw you sitting here, and me talking to you. He told me later that he felt sorry for you, When I asked him why, he told me. What I can't understand is why, if everyone knows, no one bothered to clue me in. Don't know. Could be for any number of reasons. Name a few. In this day and age, there are open marriages, couples who swing with others, and guys who get off on their wives being with other men. Some people like you too much to be the one to cause you pain, and others might dislike you enough to be glad it's happening to you. There might be people who like you, but like your wife more. She finished her screwdriver and said, "Break's over, need to get my butt back to work." I watched that butt as she walked away and wondered if she would say yes to a date once I got rid of Claudia. Up on the bandstand, Bobby announced it was time for anyone in the audience who wanted to give it a shot. A voice from the back of the room called out, "I'd like to give it a try." Everyone in the room, including Bobby, was surprised to see his blonde wife, Brianna, stand up and head for the stage. Bobby looked stunned as he handed the mic to his wife. I know my dipshit husband likes to tell blonde jokes while looking right at me, but have you noticed that Bobby is also a blonde? Time for some payback, hubby dear. An Irishman, a Mexican, and a blonde guy were working on scaffolding on the 20th floor of a building. While they were eating lunch, the Irishman said, "Corned beef and cabbage again. If I get corned beef and cabbage one more time, I'm going to jump off this building." The Mexican opened his lunchbox and said, "Burritos again. If I get burritos one more time, I'm jumping too." The blonde guy opened his lunch and sighed. "Bologna again. If I get one more bologna sandwich, I'm jumping as well." The next day, the Irishman opened his lunch, saw corned beef and cabbage, and jumped to his death. The Mexican found burritos in his lunch and leaped off the scaffolding. The blonde guy saw bologna again and followed suit, leaping to his death as well. At the funeral, the Irishman's wife was sobbing. She said, "If I had known he was so tired of corned beef and cabbage, I never would have made it for him again." The Mexican's wife also cried, "I could have made tacos or enchiladas. I didn't realize he hated burritos so much." Everyone turned to the blonde guy's wife, and she said, "Don't look at me. He packed his own lunch." She got a huge laugh and continued, "What do you call a blonde guy with an IQ of 35? Gifted. Why don't blonde guys eat more M&Ms? Because they're too hard to peel. What's the difference between a blonde guy and government bonds? Bonds mature. And last but not least, what do blonde guys and beer bottles have in common? They're both empty from the neck up." Brianna received a standing ovation from the women in the audience and their male companions who wanted to stay in their good graces. Normally, when the comic finished, Bobby would take the mic, ask if anyone else wanted to give it a try, and if no one did, he'd tell a few more blonde jokes before thanking everyone and wishing them a good night. But this time, Bobby didn't come up. After Brianna set the mic down and walked back to her table, Bobby finally reappeared on stage. As he bent to pick up the mic, he muttered, "Bitch," without realizing the mic was sensitive enough to pick it up. A hush fell over the crowd when Bobby finally spoke into the mic, saying, "That's it for tonight, folks." The usual cheers and applause were noticeably absent. I decided to head home. The next 3 months passed with me maintaining the facade of a loving husband, while Claudia played the part of a devoted wife. I received several commission checks and a bonus, which I cashed and stashed away in a safe deposit box that Claudia didn't know about. It wasn't a huge sum, about 10 grand, which wasn't nearly enough to sustain me after a divorce where I'd have to give up half of everything. But then fortune smiled on me. Like many others, I bought lottery tickets, crossed my fingers, and dreamed. I got lucky and won the Powerball. I matched 4 numbers, had the Powerball and the Power Play, making my ticket worth $40,000 before taxes. After taxes, I ended up with about $28,200. It wasn't enough to make me rich, but it was more than enough to give me a fresh start after Claudia. I had 6 months to cash in the lottery ticket, so I needed to finalize the divorce before then to ensure the money wouldn't be considered marital property subject to division. The timing seemed perfect. Claudia had recently received a raise that paid her slightly more than I made, which meant no alimony would be required. However, I would still have to cover the court costs, and the only way around that would be if Claudia filed for divorce herself, something I didn't foresee happening. My biggest concern was that Claudia might contest the divorce. If she did, she could potentially drag out the proceedings beyond the claim deadline for the lottery ticket, turning it into a shared asset. I needed to ensure she wouldn't want to fight the divorce. Although she might not want to contest it, I needed to be sure. With no-fault divorces, claiming infidelity as a reason didn't change the fact that assets would still be split equally. Even if I filed and cited infidelity, Claudia could dismiss my claims, insisting I had no proof and that my suspicions were just insecurities that required marriage counseling. The truth was, I had no solid proof. Saying everyone knows wasn't enough, and neither was seeing them holding hands and kissing. I needed concrete audio and video evidence to present to Claudia, making it clear that she was caught and had no chance of fighting the divorce. Unfortunately, after consulting with several private detective agencies, I discovered that I couldn't afford to obtain the necessary proof through their services. As I sat in the reception area of my doctor's office, a woman wheeled an elderly man into the room. While she approached the reception desk, the man sat there quietly. I was contemplating striking up a conversation with him when a little boy slipped off his mother's lap and walked over to the wheelchair. He placed his hand on the old man's and said, "I know how you feel. My mom makes me ride in the stroller too." The woman, Maria, who had brought the elderly man, chuckled heartily. She continued, "As a pediatric nurse, I often have the tough job of giving immunization shots to kids. One day, I walked into the room to give 4-year-old Lizzie her shot. When she saw the needle, she screamed, 'No, no, 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 no.' Her mother scolded her, saying, 'Lizzie, that's not nice behavior.' Lizzie then yelled even louder, 'No thank you, no thank you.' This got a polite laugh from the audience. Maria finished her routine with a final story. I was out biking with my 8-year-old granddaughter, Carolyn. I got a bit wistful and said, 'In 10 years, you'll want to be with your friends instead of biking and swimming with me like you do now.' Carolyn shrugged and replied, 'In 10 years, you'll be too old to do all those things anyway.' It was open mic night at the Strip, and I was enjoying a drink or two before heading home to a Claudia-less house. She was out of town again. Cookie took the stool next to me, as usual, and asked with her familiar line, 'Buy a poor working girl a drink?' It seemed like we were falling into a routine, so I smiled and waved Karen over. She arrived with Cookie's drink already in hand. 'You seem quiet tonight, Wally. Not enjoying the entertainment?' Cookie asked. 'I've got a lot on my mind, Cook.' 'Like what?' I was in the mood to unload everything. 'It doesn't seem like much of a problem to me. So you can't afford it?' 'Just get someone who can,' she suggested. 'What do you mean?' 'You mentioned you don't think his wife knows, so why not tell her? Let her handle it. It's all public record, and it won't cost you a thing.' I laughed, grabbed her, and kissed her. 'Thank you, thank you, thank you.' I kissed her again. She laughed and said, 'Once you're done with that mess, maybe we can do this again.' 'Definitely something to look forward to,' I said, and I got up and left the bar. The next day, I called Sarah Billings, reminded her who I was, and asked if we could meet. When she inquired about the topic, I told her it was a delicate matter that was better discussed in person. She agreed to meet for lunch at Tricoxi's at noon. I arrived 10 minutes early, informed Jared that I was expecting a guest, and took a booth in the back. Mrs. Billings showed up right on time. After settling into the booth across from me, she got straight to the point. 'So, what is this situation you wanted to discuss?' While I waited for her arrival, I pondered the best way to broach the subject, but had yet to come up with a clear approach. When Sarah Billings sat down and cut straight to the point, I decided to do the same. 'Your husband and my wife are having an affair. It's been going on for a while now,' I stated flatly. You can't be serious, she replied, her tone incredulous. I assure you I am. Do you have any proof? Only what I've witnessed myself. You've actually seen them together? Not in the act itself, but I've seen enough to be convinced. I don't understand. You've seen them, but not together? I detailed how I'd learned of their affair and described my visit to Houston, including what I observed there. I admit that it isn't the kind of proof a court would accept, but I'm certain of what I saw after they got off the elevator on the 9th floor. If I had seen that, I'd have no doubt either. What do you plan to do? I'm going to divorce her as quickly as possible. Thank you for informing me. I had 2 reasons for telling you. The first was that I felt you deserved to know. And the second? It's pretty self-serving, I admitted. The divorce will be a lot smoother if Claudia doesn't contest it, but I'm sure she'll fight it in the absence of irrefutable proof. Unfortunately, I don't have that proof. I looked into hiring a private detective, but it's far beyond my budget. However, you can afford it. My hope is that you'll gather the proof needed to deal with your cheating husband, and in return, you could share that evidence with me. Sarah gave me a thoughtful look before responding. So, you're suggesting that we could both get revenge by having an affair ourselves, just to rub it in their faces? I chuckled and said, Come on, Mrs. Billings. No one would believe that a woman like you would be interested in a guy like me, even for revenge. Besides, if we did that and they found out, it would only complicate things further. Claudia would use it to countersue, which would drag out the divorce. My goal is to end it as quickly as possible. True, it would complicate mine as well. Let's just leave that as a what might have been and move on. We exchanged cell phone numbers and went our separate ways. When I got home, Claudia was there. We shared a meal and chatted about our days, maintaining our roles as loving spouses. After dinner, we curled up on the couch and watched TV until it was time for bed. Tuesday was a repeat of Monday, and I expected Wednesday would be the same. However, around noon, Claudia called to let me know that she and her boss needed to be in Detroit for a meeting early Thursday morning. They'd be catching a 4 p.m. flight, so she wouldn't be home that night. So, with Claudia out of town, I did what I usually did on Wednesdays and headed to the landing strip. I had worked late, so I arrived after open mic night had already begun and missed Bobby's usual blonde jokes. Karen brought me my PBR, and I turned my attention to the bandstand. I noticed that Brianna wasn't at her usual table, which struck me as unusual, given that she never missed an open mic night. I couldn't help but wonder if last week's incident had anything to do with her absence. The guy on stage was a regular customer, but I hadn't seen him perform before. He started with, "The economy is so bad. CEOs are now playing miniature golf. Hot Wheels and Matchbox stocks are trading higher than GM. McDonald's is selling the quarter-ouncer. Parents in Beverly Hills have fired their nannies and are now learning their children's names. A truck full of Americans got caught sneaking into Mexico. Motel 6 won't leave the light on anymore. And finally, the mafia is laying off judges." I gave a polite laugh, and just then I heard, "Buy a poor working girl a drink?" I turned to see Cookie had taken the stool next to me. It had become routine, so before I could say anything, Karen was already setting Cookie's drink down. I surprised her by grabbing her and giving her a big kiss. "Damn, what's that for?" I took your advice and reached out to Sarah Billings. She had no idea her husband was cheating on her. I'm pretty sure she'll gather enough evidence to deal with him. Even if she doesn't share the details with me, once she divorces him, it'll be public record, and I can use that information. "And all I get for this advice is a kiss?" Cookie asked, raising an eyebrow. "What would you like instead?" "Ask me again when your divorce is finalized." I gave her a long look and said, "Count on it." She smiled, finished her drink, and headed back to work. When I got home from work on Thursday, Claudia was there and nearly finished preparing dinner. As I walked in, she asked, "Dinner or dessert first?" "Dinner first. If I start with dessert, we might never get to the meal, and it'd be a shame to waste it." I remember when you always chose dessert first. And I remember when you weren't the cheating woman I discovered you to be, I thought as I replied. I was a lot younger then, and didn't realize that I needed food to keep up my strength and endurance. After dinner, we cuddled on the couch, watched TV, and then went to bed. Claudia was either making love or pretending to. The next week passed, and Claudia didn't go on any trips. However, she did work late and had to go in for a half day on Saturday. We had some passionate times in bed during those days, and I couldn't help but wonder if it was her way of compensating for her guilt, trying to make up for what she was giving her lover. I doubted I'd ever truly know the answer. Sarah Billings called me on Tuesday and asked to meet at Tricoxi's for lunch. When I arrived, she was already seated in a booth at the back, a large envelope on the table before her. She slid the envelope toward me as I took my seat. "It's everything you could ask for and more," she said. "You already know about the affair, so I wouldn't bother watching the CDs if I were you. The images will probably haunt you. Trust me, they're burned into my mind. Thomas is in for a rude awakening when I serve him. My investigator found out that he rented an apartment for their rendezvous. If he had used his own name, the investigator wouldn't have had a legal right to wire the place. But he made a mistake and billed it to the company. Since I'm an officer of the company, I authorized the surveillance. Let me guess. Tuesday and Thursday when Claudia said she was working late, and Saturday when she mentioned working a half day? Exactly. And also Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for long lunches. I'm surprised they didn't do something on Sunday to complete the week. Our wedding anniversary was Sunday, and Thomas couldn't slip away. Now that you have your proof, what's your next step? I'm going to hire an attorney and file for divorce. Use mine. He already has the paperwork started. I plan to have Thomas served at work just before I demote him back to his previous position. If we coordinate, we could serve them both at the same time. Give me your attorney's contact information, and I'll reach out to him as soon as I'm back at the office. I figured you might want to, so I told him to expect your call. One more thing. Because of some things they said after their meetings, I'm having an order of protection served at the same time as the divorce papers. You might want to consider doing the same. Why? What did they say? They were discussing how much easier things would be if you and I were out of the picture. Tom mentioned that if I were to die, the prenup would be void and he'd be set. Your wife laughed and said that if you died, she'd only get $100,000, $200,000 if it were an accident. Then she asked him if he had any ideas on how they could make that happen, and he said it was something to think about. I could tell from their tone they were just joking, but it gave me another angle to hit him with. My issue is, I don't think I could keep a straight face in court claiming, "I'm afraid for my life." She was probably exaggerating anyway. I only have $25,000 in life insurance. But I agree. It's good to have another leverage point. Do you have any vacation time left? 3 weeks. Why? I was thinking, the day after I demote Tom, I could appoint you as the new president of the company. It would be just a formality, but imagine how furious Tom would be to see the husband of the woman he's been cheating with as his new boss. You could even pretend to build a case against him, giving you a reason to fire him. Why not just fire him directly instead of demoting him? He'd probably sue the company for wrongful termination. What wrongful termination? The apartment he's funding with company money is clear misappropriation of funds for personal use. His affair with a married employee under his direct supervision opens the company up to a sexual harassment suit, especially if Claudia gets upset and tries to retaliate. Plus, his cheating shows he's untrustworthy, and you can't have someone unreliable running your company. Take this to your attorney and see what he says. The only downside is that you'll have to keep Claudia around, even though you probably want to strangle her. Why would I want to keep her? Because of the sexual harassment issue. Claudia could easily claim that your husband threatened to fire her and give her a bad reference if she didn't comply. Instead, keep her, give her a small raise, and promote her to the worst job in the company. Eventually, she'll get fed up and quit on her own. I glanced at my watch. I need to get back to work. Thanks for all this, I said, picking up the envelope and standing up. "What about my idea to make you president for a few weeks?" "It wouldn't have much impact if Tom isn't around to see it." "Maybe I just want to keep you around to get to know you better." "We can discuss that when we have more time." "You have my number. Give me a call." As I drove to work, I mulled over Sarah's comment about wanting to get to know me better. I planned to call her, but only to discuss the divorce and the timing of serving our unfaithful spouses. The idea of getting to know each other better seemed unrealistic. She was high-end luxury, and I was fast food. It just wouldn't work. Back at the office, I called the attorney whose number Sarah had provided. He was expecting my call and informed me that the paperwork was nearly ready. All he needed to do was update it with my information and copy it. After discussing the price and providing my credit card number, he confirmed that the documents would be prepared for my signature the following day. We scheduled an appointment for 4 o'clock. When I got home, Claudia was in one of her affectionate moods. After dinner, we went to bed early and made passionate love. Afterward, Claudia snuggled up beside me, kissed my neck, whispered, "I love you," and fell asleep. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, troubled by doubts. If she truly loved me, why was she cheating? These thoughts lingered as I drifted off to sleep. At 4 o'clock, I entered the Dewey, Cheatham and Howe offices and was shown into Stanley Howe's office. To my surprise, Sarah was there too. It turned out that my visit was not just to sign paperwork, but also for a strategy planning session. We needed to decide when to serve the divorce papers. I wanted it done as soon as possible due to the deadline for my lottery ticket, but Sarah preferred to wait for what she deemed the right moment. She suggested serving them when they were on one of their trips, ideally as they exited the elevator at their hotel. I continued to push for immediate service until Sarah finally asked, "Why is it so crucial that you can't wait a week or two?" Sarah asked. I started to explain, then hesitated. I wasn't an attorney and wasn't sure about the specifics of the law, but I worried that hiding assets could be illegal or might complicate things with my lawyer. "It's just important to me," I replied, keeping it vague. The meeting wrapped up with the plan on hold, while Sarah looked into when my soon-to-be ex and her lover would be traveling again. As we walked out of the building, Sarah suggested grabbing coffee at the shop on the first floor. We got our drinks and settled at a table. After taking a sip, Sarah said, "All right, Wally, spill it." "Spill what?" I asked. "It was clear you were about to explain why you're in such a rush to serve your wife, but then you changed your mind. So, what's the story?" I explained about the lottery ticket, the deadline for redeeming it, and why I had decided to keep it from Howe. Sarah listened and then laughed. "Not a problem, Wally. Give me the ticket. I'll buy it from you and cash it in." "I couldn't do that," I said. "Why not? Think about why you came to me in the first place. You couldn't afford a PI, and you knew I could help because of my resources. I'm still wealthy, and what good is that wealth if I can't use it to help you get what you need? I want Tommy served exactly as we discussed with Howe. I'll use my resources to make that happen. Plus, you'll end up better off if I handle the ticket." "How's that?" I asked, curious. "I'll give you 40 grand in cash," Sarah offered. "You can stash it in a safe deposit box or under your mattress. That way you won't owe any state or federal taxes on it." "But you'll end up paying the taxes," I pointed out. "So what? I'll pass the ticket to my accountant, and by the time taxes are sorted out, it'll barely register in the grand scheme of things. Once again, Wally, I'm just using my resources to get what I want." I shrugged and agreed. Somehow, Sarah managed to get me $40,000 in cash within 2 days, which I promptly deposited in my safe deposit box. Sarah's plan went off without a hitch. Claudia and her lover strolled out of the elevator at the Atlanta Marriott, hand in hand and smiling. Their grins vanished when a bubbly, attractive blonde approached them. She handed each of them an envelope and informed them they'd been served. Claudia stared at her envelope, tears streaming down her face. Her lover glared at his envelope, trying to rip it apart, but failing because of its thickness. Frustrated, He threw it on the floor and kicked it. The envelope slid across the lobby and into the elevator just as the doors closed. Claudia collapsed into a lobby chair, sobbing into her hands, while her lover, with a look of disgust, stormed off toward the bar. After several minutes, Claudia pulled out her cell phone and spent 10 frustrating minutes trying to make a call. When no one answered, she finally gave up, threw the phone onto the floor, and returned to her tears. As I turned off the CD player and ejected the disc, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. I had loved Claudia and still had feelings for her. Seeing her in such distress was difficult, but those feelings weren't strong enough to outweigh what she had done. I thought back to the morning she was served, remembering the calls I had seen her make, calls I had chosen to ignore. I wondered what she hoped to say that might change anything. When Claudia arrived home, she found that I had changed the locks. She rang the doorbell and pounded on the door for 15 minutes before I finally opened it. "Did you not read the paperwork you were served with? The order of protection requires you to stay at least 500 feet away from me, my house, my workplace, and any other place I might be. Leave now before I call the police." "You can't do this to me, Wally. This is my home too." "The judge who signed the order didn't see it that way, Claudia. Now leave before I call the cops." "Damn it, Wally, you have to let me talk to you. You need to let me explain." "No, Claudia, I don't. The case of clap you gave me said it all," I said, and then I slammed the door in her face. Of course it was a lie. She hadn't given me any disease, but I hoped the idea gnawed at her enough to make her get tested. 5 minutes later, she was still banging on the door, so I decided to call the cops. When 2 officers arrived, I showed them the paperwork, and they informed Claudia that she needed to leave. She tried to argue, but they made it clear that she needed to go and stay away or risk being arrested. With a resentful glance at the house, she finally left. 2 days later, I called Claudia and agreed to meet her at Barney's Tavern to hear her out. When we sat down, I got the same excuses I expected. She claimed she did it for us, that the money from the affair would help pay off our debts, and she planned to quit once that was settled. She insisted she loved only me, that her time with Billings was nothing but casual, and that she was ready to move past it. I listened patiently before responding. "Just sign the paperwork and mail it in, Claudia. Do that, and all the video I have of you and Billings will stay private, away from family and friends. Sign it and let it go." After watching those videos, the images are burned into my mind. They won't fade as long as you're around to remind me. We're done, Claudia. Accept it and move on. "Damn it, Wally. I don't want a divorce. I love you." "Then you shouldn't have started cheating. You're used and damaged goods now, and I want nothing more to do with you. Consider yourself lucky you still have a job, more than can be said for your lover." I got up and left her sitting there, smirking to myself, knowing she'd be stuck with the check when she finally left. 3 days later, Sarah called and asked to meet for lunch. We rendezvoused at Tricoxi's, and after Mandy took our orders, Sarah filled me in on the aftermath of Shithead's serving. Apparently, he never found the envelope he'd kicked into the elevator, so he was oblivious to the order of protection. When he got home, he discovered that Sarah had changed the locks. He began banging on the door, kicking it, and shouting for Sarah to, "Get your ass down here and open the fucking door." He hadn't noticed the car parked outside with Avery Security Service painted on the side. 2 men emerged from the vehicle and politely asked him to leave. His response was a string of profanities and demands for them to get off his property. One of the guards informed him that they were hired to enforce the order of protection, which required him to stay 500 feet away from the house and Mrs. Billings. He continued to curse them out and push one of the guards. After a brief tussle and a jolt from a taser, he found himself surrounded by 2 police officers and slapped into handcuffs. When Shithead was released from jail and showed up at work, he was met by 2 security guards who informed him that he was only permitted in the lobby. One of the guards made a call, and within minutes, the HR manager arrived to inform Shithead that he was terminated for misappropriation of company funds and violating the company's morals policy. "You can't do this to me. I run this place," he yelled. Despite his outburst, the HR manager had no choice but to call the police when Shithead refused to leave. The police arrived and took him away for violating the order of protection a second time. He was unaware that Sarah was in the building. When he faced the judge, the same one from his previous case, he managed to beat the charge, as he had no way of knowing Sarah was present. She didn't have an office in the building and wasn't part of the regular staff, so he had no reason to suspect she might be there. The judge accepted this explanation and released him, but he was humiliated, having been removed in handcuffs from a place where he had once been the boss. One of the people who witnessed this was Claudia. As chairman of the board, Sarah stepped in as acting president and informed Claudia that her role as a personal assistant was no longer needed. Claudia was reassigned to the secretarial pool until another position could be found. Despite retaining her salary and benefits, Sarah confided that she had considered firing Claudia, but had been persuaded otherwise by me. Sarah mentioned that Claudia was visibly shocked when she learned Sarah was aware of me and our conversations. The next day, Sarah called Claudia into her office and informed her of her promotion to office manager at a plant 30 miles away. Claudia was also given a 10% raise, ensuring her pay would match or even exceed mine, so I wouldn't have to pay alimony. Sarah concluded the meeting by telling Claudia that once our divorces were finalized, she intended to show her appreciation in a very personal way. Sarah said Claudia left her office looking dazed and confused, shaking her head in disbelief. Claudia must have taken my warnings about the videos seriously, as she didn't contest the divorce. It was a straightforward 50-50 split. Besides losing Claudia, the only significant cost was the sale of our house. We hadn't been in it long enough to build much equity, but I managed to get enough from the sale to put a down payment on a condo and move into it. Claudia rented an apartment near her new job, and she still calls me at least once a week, asking for another chance. My response is always the same. Thanks for the offer, but no thanks. The day after my divorce was finalized, Sarah called to check on the status of mine. It was finalized yesterday, I told her. Great, mine is final today. Do you have any plans for tomorrow? No, nothing scheduled. Well, you do now. Pick me up at my office at 6. We're going to celebrate our new freedom with dinner, drinks, and dancing. After that, I'm going to make good on a promise I made to both my ex and yours. Promise? What are you talking about? Remember when I told you I'd told Claudia that once our divorces were final, I'd be fulfilling a certain promise? I made the same promise to my ex. It's time to follow through on that. You don't have to do that. I didn't expect it. I thought you were just teasing Claudia. Oh no, sweetie. I meant every word of it. I hadn't been with anyone since my last time with Claudia, and Sarah was looking incredibly tempting, so I said, 6 it is. See you then, she said, and ended the call. When I picked Sarah up at 6, she looked like a vision of allure. Once in the car, she slid over next to me and gave me a passionate kiss. After breaking the kiss, she told me she had made reservations at a popular dinner club. As we drove there, she added, I had you pick me up from work because I knew some of Tommy's old contacts would be there. They'll probably spread the word that you and I are together, and I'm sure the news will reach your ex as well. Over dinner, Sarah shared updates about her new role running the company. She was enjoying it and wished she'd stepped up sooner after her father passed away. I told her about my job, the condo I bought after selling the house, and how things were going for me. After dinner, we headed to the Purple Onion for drinks and dancing. During the slow dances, she pressed so close to me that there was no space between us. Nice to see I'm having the effect I hoped for, she said. I haven't had any loving since serving Thomas. I'm incredibly horny and have been climbing the walls, waiting for tonight. I'm in the same boat, but I'm not sure how much good I'm going to be for you. I'm so charged up that I might just explode from you rubbing against me. Perfect. That'll get the first quick one out of the way. I'm ready to blow this joint and then yours if you're up for it. I wasn't used to taking charge women, but if she was ready, so was I. We left the Purple Onion, and as we waited for the valet to bring up the car, she said, I want our first time to be on the bed that Thomas and I used. We can use the bed you shared with your ex the next time. Is that okay with you? My mama taught me that ladies come first, so if that's what you want, that's what you'll get. It was a good thing the next day was Saturday, and I didn't have to work, because after Sarah was through with me, I was utterly spent and barely able to get out of bed. On Saturday, Sarah and I slept in late and went out for brunch at Pegasus. Afterward, we returned to my place and recreated Friday night's activities. On Sunday, we went back to her place. I couldn't stay the night because I needed to go home to grab my work clothes and catch some much-needed rest. For the next 2 months, Sarah and I met 2 or 3 times a week and spent every weekend together. But one Friday evening, while we were at my place, she dropped a bombshell. "This weekend will be our last together," she said. "I've enjoyed every moment we've had, but I'm not in love with you. And if you're honest, you're not in love with me either. We have great chemistry and make good friends with benefits, but that's all it is, and all it will ever be. I'd love to keep this going, but something has come up that makes it impossible." "Is it something I've done?" I asked. "In a way, yes," she replied. "Care to elaborate?" "Well, you've divorced your wife, which is part of it." "That's not very clear." "It turns out that your ex is quite a talented office manager. My office manager at corporate headquarters is leaving because her husband has been transferred to the Los Angeles office. I plan to move your ex into that position. It would be too awkward to continue our arrangement while I'm working closely with her, especially since I'm sure she's aware of our relationship. One of the reasons we started this was to tweak our ex's noses, right? Isn't that just the way? She screws up my life while we're married, and now she's doing it even after we're done. I'd better make the most of our last 3 days together," I said, picking her up and carrying her into the bedroom. Our goodbye on Sunday was emotional, and by Monday morning, I was ready to start the next chapter of my life as a single man, in search of either love or at least some serious passion. The first couple of days after Sarah left, I was in a bit of a slump, but by Wednesday, I was starting to feel better. It had been a month and a half since I'd last visited the landing strip due to all the time spent with Sarah. As soon as I settled onto a bar stool, Karen appeared with my PBR and set it down in front of me. "Welcome back, stranger." "Good to be back, sexy lady. Is tonight the night you'll finally say yes to a date with me?" "You know I don't date customers." "Then how about this? Go out with me, and I'll stop coming here." "What? And lose out on the tips you leave?" "No way, Wally. But play your cards right, and there might be a young lady here who'd give you a chance," she said with a wink before moving off to tend to another customer. Halfway through my beer, Bobby plopped down next to me. "Where have you been, Wally? Did the talent get so bad it drove you away?" "Not at all. Just had some more important things to take care of," I replied. "I get that. I saw you with Your More Important at the Alhambra about a week ago." "Good to see you back," Bobby said, before getting up to chat with a few other customers. He then took the stage, greeted everyone, and kicked off the open mic night with a classic blonde joke. A blonde buys a thermos and brings it into work to show her friends. One of her friends, also a blonde, asks, "What does it do?" The first blonde replies, "It keeps hot things hot and cold things cold." The friend then asks, "What's in it now?" The first blonde says, "A cup of coffee and 2 popsicles." With the crowd laughing, Bobby introduced the first performer of the night, who turned out to be the day shift counter guy from the Maverick, where I filled up each morning. My mom lives back in Newark, and although I haven't seen her in a couple of years, we talk on the phone at least once a week. We had a chat yesterday, and it got me thinking about everything she taught me. Here are 10 reasons why I owe my mother. My mother taught me to appreciate a job well done. She'd say, "If you're going to fight, do it outside. I just finished cleaning." My mother taught me about religion. "You'd better pray that stain comes out of the carpet." My mother taught me about time travel. "If you don't straighten up, I'm going to knock you into next week." My mother taught me logic. Because I said so, that's why. She taught me foresight. Make sure you wear clean underwear in case you're in an accident. She taught me about irony. Keep crying and I'll give you something to cry about. She taught me the science of osmosis. Shut your mouth and eat your supper. She taught me contortionism. Will you just look at that dirt on the back of your neck? She taught me stamina. You will sit there until that spinach is gone. But above all, my mother taught me patience. Just you wait until your father gets home. The crowd roared with laughter, and I couldn't help but chuckle, remembering how many of those lines I had heard myself from my mom. It seemed he had struck a chord with everyone in the audience. Halfway through the show, someone slid onto the stool next to me and said, "Buy a poor working girl a drink?" As soon as the words left her mouth, Karen was already setting a drink down on the bar in front of her. "Remember what I said about cards, Wally," Karen said, before she moved off to handle another customer. Cookie looked at me, puzzled. What did she mean by that? I think she was hinting that now that I'm divorced, I should ask you out. So, are you going to do it? Well, I'm trying to gauge my chances. What are they? You won't know until you ask. How about dinner on your next day off? No. Guess that answers my question about the odds. Not necessarily. You're losing me here. I'm getting mixed signals. I can't do dinner on my next day off, but I'm available on my second day off. And when is that? Tuesday, she replied. All right, let me try this again. Would you like to have dinner with me next Tuesday? Yes, I would. Cookie grabbed a bar napkin, scribbled something on it, and handed it to me. Call me to set it up. I've got to get back to work. With that, she returned to her duties. I finished my third beer and decided it was time to head out. On Tuesday at 6, I stood at Cookie's front door, contemplating where this new chapter of my life might lead, as I rang the doorbell.